Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A style episode. But before I do that, just want to go over, I have my free body recomp checklist. So this is a checklist I use inside the performance recomp method, which is my one-on-one coaching program. And inside of it, you learn the two types of body recomp, why it's important to focus on body composition, what is body recomp, and then again, the 10 things you need to actually see a body recomp on there. So again, completely free. Go and check that out. And again, the link to that is in the show notes there. So today's Q&A episode, I compiled some stuff from some common client check-in questions, things like that there. So trying to make this questions that my clients will ask me. And again, that obviously are things that everyday people are dealing with. So basically, client Saturday, they were working on their house. They realized they had not eaten dinner. It was 8 p.m. before they noticed this. So I didn't want to eat so late. So just had a protein shake. My calories and protein were super low that day. However, so even though it's late, should I have gone ahead and eaten a meal? Obviously, I want to take this from again, if you're someone who maybe this happens for whatever reason, you just have a busy day or you're just not hungry, and so you don't really eat there. And I'll talk about what to do there. All right. So with this, I think first of all, anytime this happens, instead of thinking of this in isolation, we always need to zoom out and look at your entire week versus just meals in isolation. I think too often people tend to just look at meals in isolation. Hey, this meal was good, therefore I'm on track. This meal was bad, therefore I'm off track. We have to get away from that. We have to zoom out and think big picture of where am I at throughout the entire week there. So in this specific example, if you underate in one day, or if you underate calories or overate, you could go both ways here. It's like, okay, again, what does your entire week look like? Because if it was just one day that happened, the impact on it is going to be very minimal there, right? Now, again, we could go both ways here. We could go super extreme. Maybe that will have a little bit more of an impact, but again, it's still going to be small if we're doing well the rest of the week. So I always want to look at what are you doing throughout the entire week? That's going to be number one thing that we have to look at there. So get out of that mindset of just looking at meals in isolation there. So that's the first thing that we're always going to look at. So if you are on track the rest of the week, I'm less concerned about what's going on. And I'm going to go over this in a minute, obviously what phase you're in is going to be super important here, but if consistently gone over, well, then that's going to be a bigger issue. If you've consistently gone under, again, depending on what phase we're in, like it could impact things. Now, obviously protein in particular, if you consistently go under protein, no matter what we're trying to do, I think there can be some issues there, which leads me to my next question is, what is your current phase and goal? What are you trying to do in this situation? Obviously, this client, we know what their goal is, but again, I'm more so just trying to relay this if this is something that you deal with regularly. But it's important to know what phase we're in. So if we're in a phase where we're trying to not be in a deficit, then this is, again, something that's going to be like a little bit higher on the priority list of we probably don't want to do this regularly. Again, I still come back to the foundation of what you do throughout the entire week is most important. So if we are trying to get out of a deficit and one day you have a day like this, again, I'm not concerned. But if these days start to stack up where you're trying to be in a deficit or you're trying not to be in a deficit, we're in a building phase and you consistently undereat calories and undereat protein, then again, I think you're going to start to run into some issues on there. If we're in a fat loss phase, maybe this kind of lines up a little bit better with that because we obviously want to get into a deficit. We want to eat fewer calories. But again, if we're also under eating protein, that's where things can become an issue. So I think, again, it also depends on the phase that we're in. So as I said, if it's more of a fat loss phase, this strategy may not be the worst thing in the world from time to time there. Again, though, running into it, like you consistently getting low protein, we could run into some issues there. So we would need to look out for that. I think next, how do you respond to going under calories? So if you are someone who has a large hunger response the next day or the rest of the week because you're way under calories, and now that causes you to feel like crap, now you make worse food choices, and then now we overconsume calories. Again, this would be something that we would maybe need to nip in the bud sooner. But if you're someone who, if you go under calories every once in a while and it doesn't really do anything to you and you're in a fat loss phase, and the rest of the week you're good, I think this is totally fine to skip a meal and go super light before bed and just let yourself be under calories for that day. But again, if you have a negative response to under consuming calories, like I said, again, you have a high training load, like all these things. Obviously, I've said this multiple times. What is the deficit throughout the week? So again, what have you done throughout the entire week? Then again, we want to be careful with doing that regularly. But generally speaking, I think we want to avoid heavy meals too close to bed. So I think in this specific example, this client made a good choice there by just not having a heavy meal too late at night. Because again, generally speaking, I just think we want to avoid those things, right? I've talked about it in previous podcasts. Our body just doesn't handle food as well later at night. Again, we can get away with higher protein and that may not be impacted, but again, higher fat, higher carb type meals, probably will be impacted in terms of how your body handles that food that you give it. It can impact sleep, but then it can also impact digestion and gut health, because again, that's a time where when we look at our circadian rhythm, we ideally want to not be eating a lot of food. That's the time where your body just again is not in the best position to from a gut health digestion standpoint on there. So again, generally speaking, we want to avoid heavy meals too close to bed. So in that situation, that was great. What I will say is if this continues to happen, we need to plan ahead to avoid having set meals for your day, having set meals, whatever it may be. Like we may need to plan ahead. And if this continues to be an issue where you underconsume calories, again, taking into consideration everything I said, then it may just be hey, you have to plan ahead. And so then that way, this doesn't continue to happen there. But I also think sometimes, and this can be tough, especially if you're in a fat loss phase, I do think sometimes, I don't want to say you have to force feed yourself, but sometimes you do have to eat, even though you don't necessarily want to, or because you're not necessarily super hungry. Again, it's all going to depend on what we're doing, but we do want to make sure we're feeling ourselves enough. Now, if we're never hungry, we obviously would need to look into things a bit more. What's going on there with that? Again, our body's really good at regulating these things. Find that if you're really under consuming calories, like again, your body's going to recognize that, and it's just usually not a thing where your body's just going to ignore that. Again, there might be some people genetically where maybe it has more or less of an impact, but generally speaking, most people are not. Like the body's smart and it's going to subconsciously get you to be hungry and eat more if you're consistently under calories. But again, the big issue being we could be under fueling from a micronutrient standpoint, from a macro standpoint. And so that would be the thing you would want to look out for. And again, this is something where in the short term, doing this, say for a couple of weeks or multiple times, like it's not a big deal. But to me, again, the body's smart and it will catch up to you over time. And that can be the issue really at the end of the day. I think in some situations, because we know that happens to people, we do need to make sure that you get in enough fuel. Because again, let's say we're taking this concept of we're in a fat loss phase. We do need to obviously get into a deficit, but we still have to make sure we fuel enough because, as I said, that will catch up to you later on. And a good example here, people who take GLP-1s, this is something that they could potentially deal with. And this is where they can run into issues long term of, you have this natural hunger is a lot, so you're just less inclined to eat. But the issue is now you start to run into issues from micronutrient deficiencies and, like I said, potentially being under low in protein. So we need to look out for that. But if we are trying to get you out of a deficit and eat enough calories, then obviously there are probably going to have to be some times where you're not necessarily super hungry, but you are going to need to fuel yourself. And again, if we are performance based, which again, and clients I work with, I want to have things from a performance lens because I want to make sure that if we're fueling performance and we're training well, you're going to see good results from that. But again, this is why I like to have clients set up meal timing structure. Hey, we're going to do 3 meals. We're going to do 4 meals per day. And that's what you're going to stick with. And that's like your home base. And that's what you're going to do most of the time, maybe 100% of the time, maybe 90% of the time. But days where things get a little bit out of whack, you move things around. Hey, maybe I'm going to do 3 meals today instead of 4. I'm going to eat a little bit more protein at each meal, maybe just eat a little bit more to match out before that. But again, you have that baseline and that structure that you can fall back on there. And so again, in this situation, it's hey, it's 6 o'clock. I've only eaten 2 meals a day. I typically eat 4. It's like now you're starting to be like, okay, I need to at least think about what I'm going to be doing here so I avoid going under. Again, if we want to do smarter meals closer to bed, we're looking at, so in this specific example with this client, let's say that we need it to make sure we fueled enough and this has happened multiple times. So now we want to make sure that we aren't going under calories a ton. And maybe this person has a response overeating after they undereat calories. We would want smarter meals closer to bed in this specific example, higher protein type meals, more whole foods. What we want to avoid is large, heavy, highly processed type meals too close to bed because that's going to do all the things that we talked about earlier. So hopefully that's a good summary of that. Let me know if you guys have any questions on that. But again, I know this is a common thing that people have when they're busy, when you guys are busy, right? All right, so another client, I'm planning to go to Disney on Saturday. I'm going to cut my calories a bit during the week and employ some tactics for Saturday, like step count, choosing high protein food options. I'm also cognizant that I've been this cut for a while, and since we are not planning to take it up for a couple more months, having slightly higher calories for one day will not be world-ending. So I love this, and I had to reframe this client to be like, hey, you really don't need to cut your calories during the week. And yeah, we just reframe this. And so I want to go over, okay, let's say you have an event, you're probably going to overconsume calories. What is the worst that can happen? And then how can we set ourselves up to make sure we don't over consume calories? As always, we want to zoom out. As I talked about in the last one, this is so important. I feel like I have to remind clients of this all the time. We need to zoom out. One day of this, not a big deal, especially if you're adherent the rest of the time. And this is why I am so adamant about staying consistent, during times when you can, because then this allows you to be a little bit more flexible when things pop up. So again, we need to zoom out, stop looking at meals and days in isolation. We need to start to look at weeks, months, what are we doing within those? Because that's ultimately what's going to change your body composition. And then also say, for example, a client, we find their maintenance is around 22 to 2,500 calories. If that client, for whatever reason, ate 3,000 calories one day, is it going to be, oh, you're 500 calorie surplus, so all that's going to go to body fat automatically? I really just don't think that's going to happen. I think our bodies are really good at adapting. Again, they're not as good as adapting upwards. Anytime we eat more calories or enough calories, our body becomes like, we have more energy, so we're able to expend a little bit more energy. Our body becomes a little bit more wasteful with that. And again, are there some maybe things from a metabolism standpoint that, again, your body adapts to that and it's not as big of a deal as you think? And again, it's probably the one day of that. Will your scale weight maybe be up for the next day or two? Maybe, but are you actually going to gain body fat from that? Probably not. Now, obviously, if we go balls to the wall with it, we eat 6,000 calories, there's a lot of other issues that we could run into from that, right? You could feel bad the next day. From a gut health standpoint, that may impact things. You may find that you're still hungry for the next couple of days. And then from a mindset standpoint, that gets people to spiral into a negative mindset, which really impacts things. So there's some things like that. I think if we go way overboard, we could run into some potential issues there. But again, even one day, I'm not overly concerned about that there. Again, it's usually, okay, you do that out of a span of 30 days, you do that 5 times. Okay, now that's going to start to add up. But in a span of 30 days, you have one day where you overconsume calories. I just don't think that's going to impact things at all. And again, our body probably does have some sort of mechanism where it compensates a bit for overconsuming calories. And again, it becomes wasteful in terms of energy expense. But then also, I'm not 100% sold on that you're going to absorb, say you technically ate 3,000 calories. I'm not 100% certain that you would absorb all 3,000 of those calories either. So again, another thing that we just need to potentially look at there. But also, as you build your skill, we tend to underestimate how good we are at making the right decisions. Now, obviously, you take someone who has no skill of doing this. And again, most people, when they get into fitness and they're very into fitness and they've been doing it for a while, they've built that skill, they continue to do it, you're going to find that people are going to fall on the spectrum of they're going to make choices that are going to get them to eat less than actually eat more. So again, I think as you continue to develop your skill, and this client has been with me for a while now, so they've definitely continued to build up that skill. Like, I just feel like we underestimate how good we are at making the right decisions to keep us moving forward. So again, that was something I explained there. But I also think it could be beneficial from like a mental standpoint and potentially a performance standpoint, right? If we do have a day that's a little bit higher calories, and even if it's a little bit over our estimated maintenance calories, again, we're talking in the context of somebody's in a fat loss phase and they have a higher calorie day, what's actually going to happen? Again, from a mental standpoint, it could be good, right? Especially if we have some parameters set up and we nail those. I think from a mental standpoint, it could be good. But even if we don't necessarily have parameters set up and again, you overconsume more than what you would want, I still think from a mental standpoint, it can be super nice to be able to do that from time to time, especially when you're in the grind of a fat loss phase for extended periods of time. Now, again, if you take someone that they're adherent 50% of the time, the mental benefits are not going to be there. This is with the context of someone has been really consistent with their fat loss phase in being lower calorie. And then again, from a performance standpoint, I think it could help your performance for the next couple of days. So obviously more calories are going to be helpful for that. So I think if anything, it could potentially be beneficial. And again, I like to have some higher calorie days built in for clients in fat loss phases. For some people, we do need to be proactive and, hey, once a week you have this. For some people, it can be a little bit more reactive. It can be a couple days closer to maintenance, whatever it is. I like to have these days built in again from the mental standpoint and from the performance standpoint as well too there. So let's talk about how to ensure that you don't overshoot if this is you. What are some things that we can do to just subconscious? So say you're in a fat loss phase, you have something like this, you don't want to track it. We already have some high calorie days built in for you. And you just want to have a day where, yes, you're in a fat loss phase. We know that when we don't track, it's easier to overconsume. But again, from a mental standpoint, you want to go enjoy, you've been crushing fat loss, and you just need a day where I'm just not going to track. How do we ensure that we're not going to overshoot on those days? And again, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be that super context as well too. I think we could take this for anybody that is just trying to get and improve their body composition and they have an event and they don't necessarily want to track their calories. How do we again ensure that we don't overshoot on those days? Understanding that if we overshoot a little bit, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. But again, doing these things is going to ensure that you don't overshoot by a ton, right? First, hydration. Let's make sure we're staying hydrated throughout the day. Simple thing that we can do on there. We don't have to take anything out. We can just literally add this in. We're just going to make sure that we're staying hydrated. You'll be shocked at how often people will not stay hydrated throughout the day, and maybe somebody adds in some alcohol on top of it, and that's going to increase your risk of being dehydrated. Just movement. Make sure you're moving more. Be inefficient with your movement. Hit a step goal. Again, just make sure you're moving throughout the day. You going 500 calories over what your maintenance is, even though you weren't planning for that, but you move throughout the day is going to look a lot different than someone who does that and they only get 2,000 steps per day. Again, I just can't overemphasize the importance of movement and how that just makes everything more effective and efficient. Food choice. Now, again, go and enjoy, but let's make sure that we get some bases in for the day. So whether that's you're going to be out for the entire day, maybe in the morning you get something that is a little bit more nutrient dense, right? Or if you have 3 meals that are going to be out of those 3 meals, make one of them that is a little bit more like towards your goals, more quote unquote healthy versus just, hey, you have 3 meals out. Oh, I'm just going to slam 6 pizzas that day, right? Protein, make sure you get enough protein. Again, that's going to help you there. Slow down and really chew your foods. Maybe you do have 3 meals that aren't great from a food quality standpoint. The next best thing we can do is really slow down and really chew that food up. And then lastly, eat until you're satisfied. So don't eat to the point to where you're like overly stuffed. Just eat to where you're satisfied. I had this conversation with a client yesterday. She has some things going on over the weekends where she's not really in control of what her food choices are. I just said, one of the things we can do here is just eat until you're satisfied, right? And she said, we don't really know how much we're going to eat. You do want to eat till you're full, which is fine. Like eating till you're satisfied though, don't go to that point to where it's, oh man, I'm just so freaking full. If you get to that point, you've just overdone it. We don't need to get to that point there. So again, those are things that we can do to make sure that we don't overshoot in that process. All right, so another client in his fat loss phase, I gave him a calorie and protein goal, and I'll talk about why I do that. And so he asked, I'm hitting my calorie and protein goal. Should I worry about carbs? Yes and no. So first of all, the reason I do this, protein and calories is going to get you 90% of the way there in the process. So if we focus on those two things and we get those dialed in, we're 90% of the way there from a body composition standpoint. I know some people will be like, hey, that's not enough. That's going to be like your clients aren't going to see as good of results if you don't also give them carb number. Again, while I generally agree, I just think that we can sometimes giving them too many things to try and hit, they can overthink it as well too. And I'll go over some things to potentially look at there and what I think is more important. So while I do think people can undereat carbs in this process, like that's definitely a thing, protein and calories are going to get you 90% of the way there if you're focused on those two things, right? Biggest reason being you have your calories. Those are made up of 3 macros. They're made up of protein, carbs, and fats. So if we, at the end of the day, have our calories in check, that's going to help with body weight management, tell our body if it needs to store energy or if it needs to use stored energy. And then protein is going to help make sure that, one, it's going to help you stay full, and it's just going to help with lean body mass. So that really ensures that if whatever energy balance we're in, it's going to make sure that it's a body composition thing that we're focused on, not just, hey, you're losing weight. Okay, you're not getting any protein. You're not exercising. You're probably going to lose some muscle in that process. We don't want that there. So again, that's why protein and calories, to me, get you 90% of the way there if you can focus on those two things. Because again, if the calories are made up of those 3 macros, if we have protein in check, we have calories in check, we can only have so many carbs and fats, right? Now, you definitely can still get those ratios wrong potentially. So again, by focusing on these two, you're just going to naturally have to have a limit on carbohydrates and fats. So they can only go so much. You can't nail your calories and protein and then have 800 grams of carbohydrates or 900 grams of fat, right? Like it's just that otherwise you wouldn't have your calories in check, and it's a calorie issue then at that point there. Now, in saying that, again, if these ratios are screwed up, like super low carb can impact performance. So if we are going low carb and you are somewhat worried about performance, then carbs could totally be something that could throw off your performance. And so we would need to make sure that's in a good spot, right? Same thing with fats. Fats get super, super low for extended periods of time. You could run into some potential issues there with that, right? So I think being too low on either one, which would mean that you're probably a bit higher on one or the other, can definitely impact things there. But in saying that, like, there's definitely times when more or less carbs are needed. So we need to look at activity levels. The more active you are, the lower your body fat is. You probably need a little bit more carbohydrates. The less active you are, the more body fat you have. We'd probably be better off going a little bit lower carbohydrate on there. But if we're in a fat loss phase, which this client is, you're going to likely need to eat fewer carbs. That's just going to be the most variable macronutrient. And so that's probably going to be the one that is going to take a hit. So it is going to be a bit lower. And again, to get into a deficit, we need to have our calories in check, right? So that's again goes back to why I said calories are super important. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what I'm going to do in this situation is I'm going to give client protein and calories goal, and then I'm going to monitor their biofeedback. How's your training performance? How do you feel? What are your hunger levels like? And then on top of it, we're also going to look at their food choice. So what are the food choices that you're making? I'm less concerned about how many carbs you're getting, and I'm more so concerned about what are those carbs and fats too that you're consuming, because to me that's more important. What is the quality of these foods that you're eating there? And now we're going to mesh those two in. If somebody has super low energy, their training performance sucks, then maybe we need to increase our carbohydrates a little bit. But maybe they're finding that training performance is fine, they're losing weight, they're feeling good, then we can keep them the same. And then also, like, if I'm looking at, again, I'm also really concerned about food choice. So we also want to take that into consideration as well too, in terms of if we're going to make any changes there. Because again, it's okay, cool, you're hitting your carbs, but it's made up of gummy bears and fruit snacks. It's like, all right, we got to improve that. Like that it doesn't matter what your carbohydrate number is, that becomes high on the priority list of we need to improve your food quality there. So hopefully that answers that. And again, like, why I'm not necessarily overly concerned about exact carb numbers, but again, there's a time and place to, you can definitely undershoot, you can definitely overshoot. It's very context dependent on the person and what their goals are and what phase they're in. So let's take this from a standpoint of somebody that's in a building phase. That's probably the time that, okay, yeah, we'll do protein and carbs, or protein and calories for what they track. But that's going to definitely be a time that I'm going to watch carbohydrate intake a bit more in that phase, right? Because again, if that is now super low in a phase where we're eating a lot of calories, that means fat's really high, and there's a good chance that performance is going to be impacted. When really at the end of the day, when we're outside of a fat loss phase, again, I said this earlier, I want to come at things from a performance lens. So I want to make sure that we're in a good training goal. And I just think low carb, very high fat is going to impact your training performance at least a little bit. Again, some people may do okay with that, but for the most part, really skewing that there and being super low carb all the time, and in a phase where we're focused on performance, is definitely going to impact things. And so we would need to look at it there. But in a fat loss phase, you just have to, carbs are just really going to fall where they need to, and they're probably going to be typically lower than what you're used to there. So last client, I just wanted to go over, she didn't really ask me a question. She mentioned that, hey, this week I saw a huge drop in weight after a couple of weeks of plateauing. And I just wanted to talk about there. And that's a common whoosh effect that you'll hear people talk about. So what is going on here? So this is, you're pushing, maybe you're feeling leaner, maybe things are looking good, but it's like scale weight's just not really following that trajectory, right? It's just staying still. It hasn't necessarily gone up. Maybe it has slightly gone up, but at the end of the day, it just hasn't really moved. It's just staying still despite you being in here. So there's a few things that could be going on in this process. So stress could be a huge thing. Stress is going to cause you to retain some water weight. So there could be some stress, but again, stress being perceived stress, but also just stress on the body. So potentially finding ways to take stress off the body is going to be super huge, whether that's, and again, it's going to depend on where's that stress coming from, in terms of that's going to be our thing that's going to dictate what we do to take stress off the body on there, right? So if sleep's really poor, circadian health is off, that's a big stressor on the body. So we need to get that dialed in. So that would be, for that person, what we would do, right? For another person, it could be they just have a really high training volume for the amount of calories they're on. So now it's, hey, do we increase calories or do we cut back on training a little bit, right? So those are things that we need to do there. We just need to find different ways to take stress off the body. Also, just understand scale weight can sometimes lag, right? Like it can lag in terms of what's going on from a body composition standpoint. So that's why in this process, if you're feeling leaner, clothes are fitting a bit looser, like we're headed in the right direction. I don't really care what scale weight's saying in the short term there. So again, body comp is important, right? Yes, we want to look at scale weight, but to tell us kind of the energy balance we're in, but sometimes it can be misleading in the short term. And so when we have kind of weight plateauing for say a week or two or whatever it may be, this is again why we need to look at body composition, because biggest thing that I see here is people overreact when this happens. And then, yeah, they get scale weight moving in the right direction, but it's not going to be the best choice from a body composition standpoint. So my next thing here is we just need to stick with what we're doing. Okay. Keep doing the things that you know you should be doing. It shouldn't be like, hey, just stick with it, keep working harder. It's stick with what you're doing, because obviously we need to make sure you're adherent, but we just need to stick with it right now, especially if you feel like you're getting leaner, if you feel leaner. Now, if you don't necessarily feel leaner, again, if a lot of people, again, it's a mental thing where they don't see scale weight moving down. So then they automatically are like, oh, my body composition is not getting better, I'm stuck. And then it impacts everything. So I think part of it is, hey, sticking with it versus making rash decisions. But we always need to double check it with us, right? So I think at the end of the day, yes, we want to stick with what we're doing, but if we're also not adherent, that's an issue, right? We need to make sure we're adherent to what we're doing. And again, adherence is going to crush fat loss goals 99.9999999% of the time. I just can't stress that enough that most of the time it is an adherence thing. And again, it's not necessarily a conscious adherence thing. It's sometimes a subconscious adherence thing that happens when we're in fat loss, right? The body will do some wonky things when you're in a deficit that, again, most people just overlook if they're not paying attention to them. So again, we always want to double check adherence in that process. But the big thing being, we just want to avoid making rash decisions. Hey, it didn't go down for a week. Now I got to slash calories even more and I got to move more. Again, that's going to be something that's going to now add more stress to your body. It's probably going to negatively impact body composition. And you're just working super hard and you're going to be more likely to burn out and injure yourself as well too. So we just need to avoid making rash decisions in this process, right? And again, what typically happens is you stick with it and boom, a week or two later, whether that be maybe there was some stress on the body that came off, or again, your scale weight just caught up to what was going on, and then you move forward, right? But again, that's that fork in the road where people tend to over push and then they get themselves into now worse body composition, and then things get tougher and tougher in the fat loss phase. Now, again, if you are adherent and it's been 3 to 4 weeks and things aren't moving, okay, then maybe we do need to potentially make a change, okay? Because we also don't want to just beat our head against the wall where we're not making change, but we're sticking to it though, right? That's not great. But I can't overemphasize the importance of adherence because that's just easy to overlook. And as I said, it's not a conscious overlooking or adherence, or sorry, it's not a conscious adherence issue. It's a subconscious adherence issue on there, whether that's from poor skill, not understanding what happens when you're in a deficit. Like there's just a lot of things that can impact that when you're in a deficit, because again, our brain gets a little wonky during that period of time. So hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any questions on any of these questions and answers. If you found this podcast be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and a review, and that will help more people find it. If you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff HOEHN_, and that's where I'm most active on social media. And that's it for now. I'll talk to you guys soon.